Night has a way of making familiar places feel distant. The world slows down, the air settles into a colder rhythm, and the quiet spaces between passing headlights stretch longer than they should. Out on the empty roads where the last traces of daylight have already dissolved into the landscape, it's easy to believe you're the only one awake. Trees lean a little closer, fields grow darker at the edges, and the asphalt feels like it has no intention of ending anytime soon. Most people think roads are simple, just lines connecting one place to another. But once the world falls silent, you start to notice that some stretches feel older, as if they've been waiting for someone to travel them alone. These stories come from moments like that, from ordinary nights when someone was simply driving home, or taking a shortcut, or following a route they'd traveled hundreds of times. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual at first. Just the steady hum of the engine, the glow of the dashboard, and the faint confidence that the world beyond the windshield will stay exactly the same. But certain roads have their own quiet habits, their own ways of shifting when no one is paying attention, and the people who wrote these accounts didn't realize they'd crossed into something strange until the world behind them didn't look the same anymore. It's unsettling how quickly the familiar can slip away when the night decides to rearrange the map. You'll notice a pattern as you listen. Small details that should have meant nothing, like a mailbox that appears twice, a set of headlights that don't belong to a car, or a gas station that seems too quiet to be real. These things don't announce themselves. They arrive slowly, the way distant sounds rise and fade on an empty road, or the way you suddenly feel watched even though no one is around. Every person in these stories tried to explain what happened in the most ordinary way possible. But there's a softness in their voices that tells you they still don't understand where they actually were that night, or how they ever made it back. So settle in, let the night draw closer, and listen as the road grows darker just beyond the edge of the headlights. These are true experiences from people who discovered that some places don't lead where you expect them to, and some roads never plan to bring them home. And tonight, we begin with the first one. I've always liked driving at night. There's something about the emptiness that makes the world feel softer, like the noise of the day finally drains out of the air and leaves only the steady sound of your engine and the faint glow of passing trees. On this particular night, I wasn't in a rush. I had stayed later than usual at a friend's place, and by the time I headed home, the sky was already inked over with deep navy, the kind of darkness that makes the stars feel closer. I decided to take the old back road, a route I knew well and had used hundreds of times. It was a little longer, but it was quieter, and after a long week I just wanted a peaceful drive with the windows slightly cracked and the cool air drifting in. For the first few minutes, everything felt normal. The white lines on the pavement glowed softly under my headlights, and the familiar bends in the road came exactly when I expected them to. But somewhere around the midpoint, I realized I hadn't seen a single house in a while. Normally, this road had long stretches of farmland dotted with small homes, porches lit by motion sensors, barns with dim security lights, the occasional mailbox reflecting back at me. But as I looked ahead, the road seemed strangely empty. No driveways, no porch lights, not even the faint silhouette of a fence. At first, I blamed my own distraction, assuming I drifted into my thoughts and simply missed the landmarks. But a few minutes later, the unease returned when I noticed the same thing again. Nothing on either side, just open fields swallowed by darkness. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see deeper into the black beyond the reach of my lights. The road usually felt open and familiar, but now it felt hollow. I caught myself glancing at my rearview mirror more often than usual, not because I expected anything there, but because the darkness behind me felt heavier than normal. It was the kind of darkness that doesn't just sit, it presses. Another minute passed, and that's when I noticed the mailbox. The leaning black mailbox on a crooked post, half lost in weeds. I remembered it immediately because it had been broken for years and the house behind it always had three dim yellow windows. But tonight the mailbox was there and the house was. There was only a high patch of grass swaying slightly in the breeze. I tried to shake it off. Maybe the house lights were off, I told myself, and the night just made it harder to see. But a few minutes later, I saw the same mailbox again. Same crooked angle, same dead weeds. And this time I felt my fingers tighten around the steering wheel before I even processed why. The road curved gently right after that mailbox, and I should have been past it for good, but here it was again, lining in the exact same way, as if the road had looped back to it without me noticing. I checked my speed, wondering if fatigue was messing with me, and for the first time I wondered how long I had really been driving. When I lifted my eyes to the dashboard clock, I froze for a moment. The time hadn't changed, not even a minute. The soft digital glow showed the exact same numbers it had when I first turned onto the back road. A shiver ran across my shoulders. I blinked hard and looked again, but the digits didn't move. I wasn't sure whether to be confused or scared, but I could feel something settling in the pit of my stomach, something cold and heavy. I reached for my phone to check the time there instead, and that's when the second realization hit. My phone's screen refused to turn on. It didn't show a dead battery, didn't flicker, didn't light up at all. It just stayed black, reflecting my faint silhouette. I rubbed my thumb across it, pressed the buttons, tried everything, but it remained completely unresponsive, like a piece of cold glass with no device behind it. I slowed the car slightly, trying to think. The road stretched ahead in a perfectly straight line, the gravel shoulders blending into fields that looked identical on both sides. Normally, there were small lights in the distance, farmhouses, yard lamps, even a few wind turbines blinking red far out near the horizon. But tonight, everything beyond my headlights looked washed out, like an unfinished painting with all the details erased. I looked again for any sign of life, any shape in the dark, but the fields were smooth and empty, and the sky felt too flat, as if the stars were in the wrong places. The thought crossed my mind, just a flicker barely formed, that maybe I should turn around. But when I glanced at the mirror again, all I saw was an endless stretch of black road behind me. It didn't look like the same road I'd traveled earlier. It looked narrower, more compressed, like the darkness on either side was closing in, and something about the way it sat there made my chest tighten. I didn't want to drive back into that. I didn't want to let the darkness behind me swallow the car. So I kept going, even though the road felt different beneath the tires, like the surface had changed its texture slightly. That's when the world went silent. I don't mean quiet, I mean silent in a way that felt unnatural. Even with the window cracked open, I couldn't hear the wind anymore. The tires didn't hum, they just rolled soundlessly. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I shifted my weight in the seat, and even that didn't make the faint fabric noises I expected. Everything was muted, absorbed, as if the world around me wasn't fully real. I tried to swallow, and even that sounded too soft. Then I saw something ahead. At first it looked like a shadow across the road, just a vague shape lying low against the asphalt. My heart beat faster as I approached, expecting maybe a fallen branch or a piece of equipment. But when my headlights washed over it, there was nothing there. No object, no branch, just a subtle ripple in the light as if the air had thickened. And then, right after I passed that spot, the world behind me disappeared. Not slowly, not subtly, it vanished. My rearview mirror no longer showed a road. It showed only a dense wall of darkness, as if the world behind my car had been switched off. I don't know how long I kept driving after that. The clock still hadn't changed. The road felt longer than it had ever felt in my life, stretching into a distance that didn't seem possible. I remember gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached and forcing myself not to look behind me again. I tried to focus on the faint shimmer of the pavement, the way the headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the night. At some point, I whispered out loud, just to hear something, anything. But my voice sounded muted, like I was speaking through layers of cloth. And then, without warning, the world snapped back. The hum of the engine returned. The wind pressed faintly through the window. The dashboard clock jumped forward 12 minutes. The rearview mirror showed the familiar curve of the road again, along with the distant glow of a farmhouse porch light. My phone lit up in my lap with a flood of delayed notifications. I didn't understand what happened, but the moment normal sound returned, I felt my breath break loose in a shaky exhale. When I finally pulled onto the main highway, everything felt ordinary again. The traffic, the streetlights, even the fatigue, it all felt like slipping back into reality after drifting too far from it. But in the days that followed, something stayed with me, something I still can't explain. I drove that same back road in daylight, hopping to reassure myself, but none of the houses were missing. None of the landmarks were out of place. The mailbox was there only once, exactly where it should be. And yet, every time I pass that stretch now, I feel the same quiet pressure at the back of my neck. The memory of a road that didn't want to end, and a darkness that didn't want to let me turn back. I don't take that route at night anymore. I don't think I ever will again. There's something on that road, something that waits for people who choose silence and solitude without realizing that not all places sleep when we do. And sometimes, when I'm driving late and the world is a little too quiet, I still wonder whether that stretch of darkness is out there somewhere, trying to find its way back to me. I've always driven to work before sunrise. My shift starts early, too early for most people, so I'm usually on the highway when the world still feels half asleep. There's a particular quiet that settles over rural roads at that hour, the kind where even the radio feels too loud and the only light comes from your own headlights stretching ahead like a narrow tunnel. I never minded it. The emptiness used to feel calming, almost like I had the whole world to myself. So on that morning, I remember feeling unusually awake. The air was cool enough that I cracked the window just slightly to let the breeze drift in, mixing with the faint warmth of the car heater. It was just me, the hum of the engine, and miles of dark pavement, nothing unusual at all. A few minutes into the drive, I saw a figure on the shoulder up ahead. That wasn't unusual either. People walked early sometimes, heading to nearby farms or cutting across the fields. As I got closer, I saw it was a man, hood pulled up, hands in his pockets, his pace slow and steady. I remember thinking he must have been freezing because the air had that crisp bite that settles right into your lungs. I passed him without slowing, but I did glance into the mirror out of habit. For a split second, my headlights painted the shape of him walking away, and then the darkness swallowed him. I didn't think much of it. There was no reason to. It was maybe 3 or 4 minutes later when I saw him again. Same posture, same hood, same slow stride. At first, I thought there must have been two people walking the same direction, but as I passed him, a strange heaviness settled into my stomach. The way his head tilted, the way his arms hung just slightly too still, it was identical to the man I'd seen earlier. Even the way his shadow stretched across the gravel looked the same. I forced myself to keep driving, telling myself it was just a coincidence, that I wasn't awake enough to trust my eyes. But the road ahead was long and straight, and I could see the next rise clearly. And there he was again, standing just at the edge of the next shoulder as if he'd been waiting for me to approach. My hands tightened on the wheel before I understood why. I didn't slow down, but as I passed him this time, I noticed something new. The air inside the car grew colder, not gradually, but sharply, like someone opened a door I hadn't noticed. I reached instinctively toward the climate controls, but the chill wasn't that kind of cold. It felt damp, like a draft coming from behind me. I didn't want to look in the mirror, but eventually I had to. And that's when I caught it, the faintest suggestion of movement in the back seat, just the shape of something shifting its weight. I blinked hard, telling myself it was just the light playing tricks. The seat was empty, nothing unusual, but I felt the cold brush against my neck again, soft and deliberate, the kind of chill that makes your skin tighten. I reached back blindly without turning, fingers grazing the fabric of the seat. It felt normal, nothing there. But my pulse wouldn't slow, not with that strange cold drifting around me like a pocket of winter trapped inside the car. So I rolled the window up, thinking maybe the draft came from outside, but the cold didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier. I stole another glance in the mirror, and that's when I saw it. The back door on the passenger side was slightly open, barely an inch but unmistakably ajar. I hadn't heard anything, not a click, not a shift in pressure, just that silent, unnatural opening. I tried to tell myself maybe I hadn't closed it properly when leaving home, but I remembered closing it. I always closed it firmly because the latch had a particular sticking point, and even if I hadn't, I would have heard it move. But I didn't hear anything at all. My heart started beating too fast for how calm the road looked around me. I reached down and pressed the lock button, listening for the satisfying clunk of the doors securing. They did, all of them, even the one that was supposedly ajar. But when I looked again, the door was still open by the same tiny gap as if the lock didn't apply to it. I focused on the road ahead, trying to steady my breathing. The highway was empty, stretching in a straight line with nothing but distant fields and occasional patches of fog. But I could feel the cold behind me again, like a presence leaning closer, not touching but aware, watching. When I passed the next reflective mile marker, I checked the mirror again, mostly out of fear, partly out of some instinct I couldn't ignore. That's when I saw the man again, not walking this time, just standing on the side of the road, facing the highway, his head angled ever so slightly toward my car as I drove past. I didn't know how he kept appearing ahead of me. I didn't understand how he moved so silently or why he always seemed to appear exactly when I let my guard lower. And I definitely didn't understand why the cold in the car intensified every time I saw him. At some point, I realized I had stopped hearing my own tires. The steady sound of rubber on pavement faded, replaced by a muted, muffled quiet that didn't make sense. Even the engine sounded softer, as if something was absorbing the noise. I tried turning the radio on for comfort, but nothing played, just a faint hush like the static wasn't allowed to form. My hands were trembling slightly on the wheel, and I had to remind myself to breathe. Then the cold shifted, not the temperature, the location. It slid from the right side of the car to the left, slow and smooth, as if someone unseen had crossed the back seat. I forced myself not to look. I kept my eyes on the road, on the fog that seemed to thicken just ahead. But the pressure of that cold presence lingered, settling near the left rear door, heavy and patient. That was the moment I heard it, a soft click. The kind of click a door makes when someone pulls it a little wider. My breath caught, the car didn't swerve, but every muscle in my body tightened. I knew I needed to stop. I needed air, I needed light, anything but the darkness inside the car closing around me. So I pulled into a small turnout near a broken street lamp that glowed just barely enough to paint the asphalt in a pale circle. I kept the engine running, forcing myself to face the moment. When I finally turned to look, the back seat was empty, completely empty. No footprints, no movement, no figure, just fabric and shadows. But the rear passenger side door, it was open. wide open now, swung out into the cold morning air like someone had stepped out quietly and left it unlatched behind them. As I didn't get out to close it, I shifted into drive and let the car move forward slowly, keeping my eyes ahead. Eventually, the momentum pulled the door shut with a loud thud, and the sound startled me more than it should have. But even after it closed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had traveled with me for a while. Someone who didn't belong in the car. When I reached work, everything looked the same as always. Bright fluorescent lights, coworkers yawning, the usual chatter about weekend plans. I didn't mention the hitchhiker. I didn't talk about the cold or the door or the strange silence that filled the car. But every morning after that, when I started the drive, I checked the back seat twice. Sometimes 3 times. And no matter how firmly I shut it, the back passenger door has never latched the same again. It closes, but it doesn't hold. It always feels like it's waiting for someone to open it from the inside. I still take that route. There's no alternative road. But every time I pass the stretch where I first saw him, I feel a subtle drop in the temperature, a soft pressure in the air behind me, almost like a breath being held. And sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I think I see a figure on the shoulder, hood pulled up, hands in pockets, walking nowhere, waiting for someone who won't notice the door until it's too late. I used to enjoy late-night drives more than I should probably admit. There's something soothing about having the entire road to yourself, especially after spending the day around too many people and too much noise. On this particular night, I was heading home after visiting a friend who lived outside town. It was already past midnight, and the air had that early winter sharpness that slips through your clothes even when the heat inside the car is turned up. I remember feeling tired, not dangerously tired, more like that quiet heaviness that comes after a long week. The road ahead was familiar, a winding scenic route I had taken countless times. It ran through a stretch of forest that always felt peaceful, even in the dark. I wasn't in a hurry, I just wanted a calm drive and maybe a warm drink waiting at home. Somewhere near the halfway point, I saw a bright splash of orange reflecting my headlights. A detour sign. It stood at the entrance of a narrow dirt road I had never noticed, pointing left into a tight cluster of trees. The reflective arrow gleamed as if it had just been set up. I slowed a little, expecting to see cones or construction equipment further ahead, but there was nothing, no workers, no lights, not even a warning sign announcing road repairs. Still, I told myself the county did random overnight work sometimes, especially in colder seasons when traffic was lighter. So I turned onto the dirt road, assuming I'd merge back onto the main route a few minutes later. The moment my tires shifted from pavement to gravel, something felt off. Not dramatically, not immediately, just subtly wrong in a way I couldn't define. The forest around me seemed too quiet. The branches hung heavy over the narrow path, almost touching the top of my car, and the headlights had trouble cutting through the darkness. Normally, forest roads feel alive with faint rustles and clicking insects, but this one felt as if everything had stopped to listen. I rolled the window up fully without realizing why. A minute later, I passed another detour sign. Same orange, same arrow, same faint smear of dirt on the bottom corner. That struck me as strange. Usually, detours didn't require repeating signs that closed together. I kept driving, expecting the road to widen or split onto a paved section. Instead, the trees only tightened, their shadows thickening as if the forest were folding inward. Another sign appeared, identical to the last two, same angle, same reflection. And this time the little smear of dirt was in the exact same place. For the first time that night, I felt a small prick of unease at the back of my neck. I slowed the car and leaned closer to the windshield, wondering if someone had placed the signs incorrectly or if I had misunderstood the detour entirely. But the dirt road continued straight ahead, winding deeper into silence. I considered turning around, but the path was too narrow. I would have had to reverse a long way, and the thought of backing into that darkness felt worse than continuing forward. I pressed on, trying to calm myself, reminding my brain that everything had a reasonable explanation. But the longer I drove, the more the forest began to feel unnatural. The temperature dropped inside the car, not drastically but noticeably. My breath didn't fog, yet the air felt colder against my skin. As I turned up the heat another notch. No change. The cold didn't feel mechanical, it felt ambient, like stepping into a room where the windows had been left open all night. Somewhere around the fifth or sixth minute, I passed another detour sign, and when the headlights swept across it, my stomach tightened. It wasn't just similar, it was the exact same sign, the same scratch across the bottom left, the same faint bend in the metal, as if the sign I had passed earlier had somehow repositioned itself further ahead. The road didn't appear to loop. I would have noticed a turn or curve, but the sign was unmistakable. I began to question whether the road was curving subtly without me realizing, maybe bending in a deceptive way. But the navigation app on my phone showed a straight line into nothing. The map didn't even show the dirt road I was on. That's when the phone signal dropped completely. Not just low coverage, no signal, no data, nothing. The screen flickered for a moment, which I told myself was probably due to the cold. I tried to pull up a saved map, but it refused to load. I tapped the screen harder than necessary, a small pulse of panic beginning to build. My headlights kept following the same claustrophobic tunnel between the trees, and the road didn't seem to change. Not a new shape, not a clearing, not a landmark. Just endless gravel and the same oppressive silence. I don't know how long I stayed on that path. It felt like 10 minutes, maybe 15, but the clock on my dashboard refused to change. It was stuck, frozen at the same minute as when I first took the detour. I stared at it long enough to feel the unease rise again in my chest. It wasn't possible. Clocks don't freeze. I tapped the plastic cover gently, as if that would somehow jolt it, but the digits didn't budge. My heart began to beat a little faster, the quiet thudding against my ribs syncing with the faint crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Then the forest opened. Suddenly, abruptly. The trees parted into a wide clearing, circular and strangely symmetrical, almost too round to be natural. My headlights spread across the open space, illuminating tall grass waving gently in a breeze I couldn't feel inside the car. And in the center of the clearing, there was one thing, another detour sign. This one didn't point left or right. It pointed backward, back down the road I had come from. A cold heaviness filled my chest. I stared at the sign, trying to convince myself that this was normal, that there must be a logical reason for it. But as I looked around the clearing, everything felt wrong. The grass didn't move in the direction wind should blow. My engine seemed too quiet. Even the darkness at the tree line felt dense, like it was watching. I shifted the car into reverse, my hands shaking slightly, and backed up slowly until I could turn around in a wide arc. The headlights swept across the clearing one last time, catching the sign's reflective surface and throwing a thin beam of orange light across the grass. For a moment, the sign seemed closer. I blinked quickly and forced my eyes back to the road as I straightened out. Driving back felt different. The forest seemed darker. The dirt road felt narrower. I kept waiting to see more signs, but none appeared, not a single one. The trees slowly thinned, the cold began to lift, and when my tires hit the paved road again, I felt my body finally release the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The dashboard clock jumped forward 12 minutes all at once. My phone's signal returned instantly, as though nothing had happened. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the entrance to the dirt road was gone. Not obscured, gone, just a solid wall of trees. I tried to report the detour the next day. Called the county office, asked about construction work, explained where I had seen the sign. The woman on the phone sounded puzzled. There had been no roadwork scheduled, no crews assigned, no detours authorized. She told me the county hadn't placed any signage in that area for weeks. For a long time, I avoided that stretch of road entirely. But eventually curiosity got the best of me. In daylight with other cars around, the world felt safe enough to check again. Yet even after searching carefully along the forest edge, I found nothing. No dirt road, no tire tracks, no signpost marks, just trees unbroken, untouched, as if nothing had ever been built there. But sometimes, late at night when I'm half asleep and driving home again, I still catch a faint flicker of orange at the edge of the woods. Never long enough to be sure. Never bright enough to convince myself it's real. Just a brief reflection, sitting exactly where that impossible road had been, waiting for another driver who doesn't know that some detours aren't meant to lead anywhere at all. I've always found something peaceful about driving after dark. There's a kind of stillness that settles over rural roads at night. No traffic, no noise, just the steady hum of your engine and the faint glow from the dashboard. For years, I've taken the same stretch of two-lane highway through farmland whenever I worked late. It's not a scenic road by any means, just long fields and the occasional cluster of trees, but in the quiet hours it feels almost meditative. That night was no different. I had clocked out a little after 10, grabbed a quick snack, and started the usual drive home. The air was cool enough that I cracked my window slightly, letting a thin breeze drift in and mix with the warmth of the heater. Everything felt normal, ordinary, even. The kind of night you don't think twice about. The first time I saw the car, it was just a distant shape in my mirror. A dark silhouette far behind me, barely distinguishable against the empty road. Nothing unusual at first until I noticed it had no headlights on. At that distance, most cars look like vague shadows anyway, so I brushed it off. Maybe the lights were just angled oddly, or maybe I was catching the shape of a barn or a distant tree line instead. But a minute or two later, I glanced again, and the shape was still there. The same distance, same faint outline. A car, definitely a car, just running without lights. I slowed slightly, expecting it to overtake me like people sometimes do when they drive without headlights by mistake. But the shadow didn't change size. It didn't fall back either. It stayed exactly where it was, equal distance, equal shape, as if tethered to my speed. Something about that made my skin prickle. Most drivers correct themselves pretty quickly when they realize they're driving in the dark without lights. But the silhouette behind me didn't flicker or reveal any hint of illumination. It just followed. I tried not to think about it. I focused on the lines of the road, on the white paint flashing rhythmically beneath the headlights, on the soft rumbling sound my tires made as they rolled along the pavement. But every few seconds, my eyes darted to the mirror again. The car didn't get closer. It didn't get farther. And no matter how I adjusted my speed, slowing slightly on curves, accelerating on straighter parts, it matched me perfectly. That alone was strange, but what unsettled me more was that I never heard it. On a quiet road like that, you can usually hear another vehicle long before you see it, engine noise bouncing off the fields, tires hissing against the asphalt. But aside from my own car, the night felt eerily silent. I rolled the window down a little more just to check. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and dirt, but there was no second engine. No hum, no vibration, no subtle roar you get from a vehicle behind you, just the whisper of wind and my own steady movement. I remember sitting up straighter, my fingers tightening on the steering wheel without me realizing. The road ahead remained bare and open. The field stretched endlessly on both sides. Yet the darkness behind me felt heavier, like something was filling it. A few minutes later, I approached a long, gentle curve in the highway. It was wide enough that my headlights briefly arced across the field before returning to the pavement. As I turned, I expected to see the reflection of the following car's body in the mirror, just a faint glint of metal catching the light at the right angle. But the silhouette behind me didn't reflect anything. No brightness, no shape change, nothing shifting in the darkness. It looked exactly the same as it had on the straight stretch, perfectly steady, perfectly shadowed, almost unnaturally still. My heartbeat picked up. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe the car was just old or dusty or the angle prevented reflections. But deep down, I felt something else, a small, steady certainty that something was wrong. I adjusted the mirror slightly, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. But the silhouette remained, parked at that fixed distance behind me, its shape just distinct enough to know it was a car, but too dark to make out any details. Around the next bend, I tried speeding up. Not much, just a gradual increase to see if the car would drift backward or change pace. But it didn't. It stayed exactly where it had been before, unwavering, as if it were attached to me by an invisible line. A chill slid up my spine, slow and deliberate. I pressed the gas a little more. The silhouette matched. I slowed down. The silhouette matched again. Every change I made, slight or significant, the distance held perfectly. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not panic, not fear exactly, but an instinctive tightening in my chest, like my body recognized something before my mind could. I've driven alone at night for years without ever feeling unsafe. But this felt different. This felt watched. Eventually, I approached the small gas station that sat at the crossroads just before town. It's one of those older stations, dim lights, a single pump, a parking area with a cracked asphalt lot. I decided to pull in not because I needed fuel, but because I needed to know if the car behind me would follow. I signaled, slowed down, and turned into the lot. The gravel crunching under my tires broke the silence, sounding louder than it should have. When I came to a stop near the pump, I exhaled shakily, realizing my breath had been caught for longer than I intended. I glanced in the rearview mirror to see if the car was continuing down the road. But it was. It was gone, completely gone. The highway behind me was empty, no headlights, no taillights, no shape of a car disappearing into the distance. Just an open stretch of dark road. I waited there a moment, gripping the steering wheel, listening to the engine idle. I thought maybe the car had turned off into a driveway or slowed down before reaching the station. But the road had been empty for miles. There hadn't been a single turnoff. And besides, I would have seen something, movement, a flicker of reflection, anything. Trying to steady myself, I stepped out of the car. The night air felt colder than it should have. The station lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a pale orange glow across the lot. I walked toward the convenience store window, planning to just stretch and reassure myself that I was being paranoid. But as I turned slightly, something at the far edge of the lot caught my eye. A car parked deep in the corner where the light didn't quite reach. No headlights, no interior lights, a dark, still outline, the same shape I had seen behind me on the road. My breath faltered. The engine wasn't running, there was no visible movement inside, no shadow shifting behind the glass. The car sat motionless, angled as if it had been waiting there long before I arrived. But the lot had been empty when I pulled in. I was certain of it. I felt a tremor move through my hands, a soft, involuntary shake. Something about that vehicle felt wrong, not just the darkness around it, but the absolute stillness it radiated. I didn't want to get closer. I didn't want to check for a driver. Something deep inside me insisted I stay away. So I climbed back into my car, locked the doors immediately, and backed out slowly, refusing to take my eyes off that far corner. When I pulled onto the main road again, I checked the mirror just once. The car remained in the exact same spot, unmoving, disappearing into the shadows as soon as I gained distance. It didn't follow. It didn't shift. It just stayed there like it had arrived before me or waited. For the rest of the drive home, I kept checking the mirror. Nothing appeared behind me. The night regained its usual quiet and the road felt normal again. But even now, months later, something lingers in the back of my mind, something cold and unexplainable. I don't know if the car was real or if it was something else wearing the shape of one. All I know is that every time I take that road now, I feel a faint pressure at my back as if something is gauging the distance between us. And some nights in that same stretch where I first noticed it, I swear I can see a dark shape keeping pace behind me. Never too close, never too far, just waiting with its lights off. I used to bike almost every evening after work. It started as a way to clear my head, but over time it became a small ritual, same route, same pace, same stretch of quiet suburban road that felt safe no matter how late it got. The neighborhood wasn't fancy, just a mix of older houses with big yards and a few small parks scattered along the way. I knew every turn so well I could have ridden it blindfolded. Even the smells were familiar. Cut grass, someone's barbecue, the faint sweetness of a neighbor's orange tree when the breeze hit just right. That routine comforted me in a way I didn't fully appreciate until it began to change, slowly and quietly, in a way that made my stomach knot with an unease I couldn't explain at first. One evening, just after sunset, I noticed something small, so small I almost dismissed it. There was a blue house along my route, a slightly run-down bungalow with peeling paint and a crooked metal mailbox that rattled when the wind blew. I passed it every day. Sometimes the owner sat on the porch reading the paper, sometimes a dog barked behind the fence. But that night, when I rode past the corner where it should have been, the house wasn't there. Not a light turned off or a shadow hidden by trees, just nothing. In its place was an empty patch of overgrown grass waist-high and swaying gently. The fence was gone, the mailbox gone, the walkway gone. It looked like no one had lived there in years. I slowed down, confused enough that I almost circled back, but told myself maybe I misremembered the exact block. Maybe the blue house was further down. But as I kept riding, a tightness settled in the center of my chest, like some instinct was already telling me I was wrong. When I reached the next familiar stretch, I found myself glancing back over my shoulder, expecting to see the house from a different angle. But the road behind me looked flatter, emptier, like whatever had been there was erased cleanly. I pushed the thought away and focused on my pedaling, telling myself I was tired, that I was overthinking something simple. The next evening, I rode the same route, determined to prove to myself that everything was normal. The sun was lower than usual, washing the houses in a warm orange light. I passed the first few blocks without issue, same parked cars, same porch lights flicking on one by one. But when I reached the stretch where the blue bungalow should have been, the emptiness remained. Not only that, but now the house next to it was gone too. A small yellow home with a neat garden and a white trellis around the door. I remembered the trellis because someone had wrapped it with fairy lights for the holidays. But tonight, the garden was replaced with dirt, as though it had never been planted. I stopped my bike completely this time and let my foot rest on the pavement. There was no construction noise, no equipment, no signs warning of demolition, no debris or tools or workers, just silence. And the silence felt wrong, too still, too expectant. I stood there for a minute, scanning the shadows and trying to piece together what my memory insisted should be there. But every detail dissolved the harder I tried to recall it. I knew a house had been there. I could picture its windows. But when I tried to remember how many windows it had, the image slipped away like water draining through my fingers. Over the next few days, the road changed further. Streetlights I used as markers began to vanish. One night, the tall green lamppost across from the old grocery store wasn't lit. The next night, it wasn't there at all. No pole, no base, no discoloration on the concrete where it should have been. Another evening, the overhead power lines were missing from a long stretch of road, leaving the sky unbroken and too open. As every time I followed my usual path, another piece of the route had quietly disappeared, as though someone was erasing the neighborhood one detail at a time. The strangest part wasn't the physical disappearance, it was the way my memory shifted with it. The more things vanished, the harder it was to picture how they looked before. Not in the way you forget small things, but in an uncomfortable, slippery way that made me doubt whether the details had ever existed at all. I found myself pausing at street corners, staring at empty lots and blank stretches, trying to force the images back into place. But the longer I stood there, the more the emptiness looked right. As if my mind was rearranging itself to match the altered landscape. As the night everything changed for me, the air felt colder than usual. I almost didn't go for a ride, but habit pushed me out the door. The moment I turned onto the erasing road, something felt different. The silence had thickened, becoming almost tactile. There were no crickets, no distant dogs barking, no hum of electricity. The houses that remained looked dimmer, their windows reflecting no warmth. My tires made too little noise against the pavement, as if the road were absorbing the sound before it could echo. Halfway down the block, I stopped abruptly. The entire right side of the street was gone, not destroyed, gone. Every house, every fence, every mailbox replaced by an endless field of tall, unmoving grass. The grass didn't sway with the wind, it didn't rustle, it stood perfectly still as if waiting. The street lights on that side were missing. The sidewalk was missing. And the darkness stretched back further than the beams of my bike light could reach. My heart thudded softly against my ribs. I reached for my phone, intending to take a picture, but as soon as I lifted it, the screen stayed black. It wasn't dead, just unresponsive, like the device itself refused to acknowledge what was in front of me. I lowered it slowly, suddenly aware of how shallow my breathing had become. A faint sound broke the silence then, the soft creak of metal. I turned sharply, expecting to see a car or someone walking, but behind me the road was empty, completely empty. The houses on that side were still there, but the porch lights flickered in a strange, out-of-rhythm pattern like they were trying to signal something. As I watched, one of the houses blinked out. One moment it stood solid and dark. The next, it was gone, replaced by more grass. That was my breaking point. I swung my leg over the bike and started pedaling hard, my lungs burning as the cold air sliced in and out. I didn't look at the houses anymore. I didn't check the streetlights. I didn't let myself see what else was dissolving around me. I rode until my legs trembled, until the familiar lights of the main road came into view, unchanged, steady, warm. When I finally reached my house, I sat on the front step for a long time, trying to slow my breathing, trying to understand what I had seen. In the following days, I avoided that road completely. I drove the long way to work, walked different paths, and refused to go near that stretch even during daylight. Curiosity tugged at me, of course, but fear sat heavier. Somehow I knew that if I went back often enough, if I kept watching things disappear, eventually something important would vanish too, something I couldn't afford to lose. About a week later, I drove past the entrance of the old biking route, just to glance, just to see. The street was still there, but it looked muted. As if the world had repainted it with fewer details, fewer colors. I squinted, trying to remember what used to be on that corner. Was it a garden, a tall hedge, a small bench under a tree? Nothing came, just an unsettling blankness that spread out in both directions. Some roads, I've learned, don't want to stay the same. Some roads erase what they no longer want you to remember. And sometimes, if you travel them long enough, they start erasing parts of you too. I've done more long road trips than I can count, the kind where the highway stretches out in a straight line for miles and the night settles in so quietly that it almost feels like you're the only person left awake in the world. I used to like that feeling, windows cracked just enough for the cool air to drift in, radio playing softly, headlights carving out a small tunnel of light through the darkness. There was a strange comfort in it. Roads at night don't demand anything from you, they just wait. I was a few hours from home on a return trip one evening, somewhere in the flatter part of the state where farms blend into fields and the horizon looks the same in every direction. The sky was a deep, unbroken blue-black, the kind that hides the stars behind a thin haze. I wasn't tired exactly, but fatigue had crept in around the edges enough that I felt grateful when a gas station sign appeared ahead. A familiar blue and red glow promising fuel, snacks, and a few minutes of light. As I drew closer, I realized the station was one of those older ones, single row of pumps, small convenience store, faded advertisements taped on the windows. It looked almost nostalgic, the kind of stop you see in movies where nothing bad ever happens. The parking lot was empty though, aside from a single white sedan parked at the far pump. No movement inside, no driver walking around, nothing. Just a car sitting under the dim glow of the overhead lights. I pulled in anyway, slowing as the gravel popped softly under my tires. Even before I parked, something small bothered me. The lights above the pumps were on, but they didn't hum. Most gas stations make that faint buzzing sound, electricity running through metal, but these lights were silent, as if they were painted on instead of powered. I stepped out of my car and the air felt different, cooler than it had been on the highway, still, almost too still. The kind of quiet where even your own footsteps sound muted. I tried to ignore it, grabbing the pump handle and inserting my card. The screen flickered once but never displayed the usual prompts. Instead, it stayed blank, not dead, just blank, lit from within but refusing to show anything. I pressed a few buttons lightly, hesitating as I realized I couldn't hear my own taps. No beep, no click, just my fingers sinking into plastic that absorbed the sound entirely. I backed away and looked toward the convenience store, thinking maybe the station was in the middle of closing or experiencing some kind of outage. But the store lights were all on, too bright, almost fluorescent white, and the automatic doors stood slightly open, caught mid-slide. Inside, I could see shelves, a counter, even rows of drinks in the cooler, but I didn't hear anything. No hum from the refrigeration units, no faint music, no employee shuffling around. Just an unnatural stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck lift. I called out just to hear my own voice break the silence. "Hello." The word came out strangely soft, like the air thinned it before it fully formed. It didn't echo, it didn't bounce, it just dissolved. That's when I noticed something else. There were no signs of life on the shelves, no labels, no branding, no printed logos. Everything was stripped down to blank shapes, boxes without pictures, bottles without names, chips without colors. It was like walking into a place that hadn't finished being built yet, where the general outline existed, but none of the details had been filled in. A prickle of unease slid down my arms as I stepped backward toward the doorway. My eyes drifted to the parked white sedan, the one I had noticed when I pulled in. It was still there, still completely still. Something inside me tightened as I realized I hadn't heard it arrive, or leave, or run. The windows were tinted just enough that I couldn't see a driver, but the car itself didn't look abandoned. The exterior was clean, too clean. No dust, no streaks, no sign of having traveled through the same highway grit I had. It looked like it had been placed there, not driven. My pulse quickened in that slow, creeping way where fear builds from instinct long before logic catches up. I moved quietly back toward my own car, trying to keep my breathing steady. The air felt heavier the closer I got to the pumps. Even the ground beneath my feet felt wrong, too soft in places, like the gravel had been poured loosely and hadn't settled. I clicked my key fob out of habit, relieved when I heard the faint, unlocking sound from my car. At least that noise felt real. I opened my door quickly, sliding inside and locking it immediately. Before starting the engine, I looked back toward the convenience store one last time. The automatic doors had closed now, fully, and yet I still hadn't heard them move. A faint light flickered inside just once, like someone walking past the coolers, but the aisles remained empty. I shifted my gaze to the sedan in the far corner. It hadn't changed positions, but something else had changed. The interior lights were on. A soft, pale glow illuminated the shape inside, and for a moment I thought I saw someone sitting in the driver's seat, head tilted downward slightly as if staring into their lap, or waiting. My breath caught quietly. I blinked and the interior light was gone. The car looked empty again, or maybe it had never been on at all. The silence pressed harder, making the edges of my vision thrum with tension. I didn't wait to second-guess it. I turned the key, the engine rumbling to life in a burst of sound that felt almost violent against the quiet of the station. I backed out slowly, headlights sweeping across the pumps and the store one last time as I turned toward the exit. Just as I pulled onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, the gas station lights flickered, and then the entire station went dark. Not gradually, instantly. Every bulb, every sign, every beam of artificial light vanished at once, plunging the building and pumps into a perfect block of black. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, staring at the mirror. There was nothing there anymore, no lights. No shape of the store, not even the faint reflection of the metal columns. Just darkness, like the gas station had been erased the moment I left its boundaries. My hands trembled as I rolled the car forward again, but I kept watching the mirror until the road finally curved and the area disappeared from view. It wasn't until I reached the next town, 20 minutes later, that I finally pulled into a brightly lit, bustling gas station and forced myself to breathe normally again. People walked in and out, music played, machines hummed. Everything felt solid, real. Out of curiosity and maybe a little fear, I checked a map on my phone looking for the station I had stopped at, but nothing appeared along that stretch of road. No listing, no markers, no trace of any business having been there. Even the satellite view showed only a dark patch of land, empty and uneven, as though nothing had ever been built in that spot. For weeks after, I avoided that highway at night. But every once in a while, someone I know mentions a strange gas station they found on a long drive, bright lights, no people, something off about the air. They always say the same thing: they couldn't buy anything, couldn't find an employee, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And every time the station vanishes from maps afterward. I still think about the white sedan sometimes. About the faint glow inside it. About the silence swallowing every sound except my own heartbeat. And I wonder how many people have filled up their tanks there, thinking they found a safe place to stop, never realizing that some gas stations don't exist in daylight and don't stay where they appear at night. Driving home from late shifts became a kind of rhythm in my life. One of those routines you stop thinking about because it never changes. Same hour, same playlist, same rural shortcut that shaved 10 minutes off my commute. The road I used was simple: just a long straight stretch bordered by open fields and the occasional farmhouse light flickering in the distance. I'd driven it so many times I knew the cracks in the pavement, the slight dip before the wooden bridge, the way the moon sometimes rose perfectly over the eastern field. It was comforting in a strange way, predictable enough that even on the most exhausting nights I could slip into autopilot. That night felt no different at first. The air was cool, the sky clear, and the darkness familiar in a way that almost felt peaceful. The first irregularity was small enough that I wouldn't have noticed if the rest of the night hadn't gone wrong. I approached the long stretch of road where the fields opened wide on both sides, a place where I always saw the same faded scarecrow standing crooked in the left field. But tonight, the scarecrow wasn't there. The post was gone entirely, as if the farmer had suddenly decided to remove it. It bothered me only because of how strange the emptiness looked, just a blank patch of dirt where a familiar shape should have been. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it had fallen or been taken down earlier in the week without me noticing. But the feeling that something subtle had shifted tugged gently at me, the way small changes do when you know a road too well. A few minutes later, the road dipped slightly, but the angle felt wrong. Instead of the familiar drop, the slope pulled my stomach in a strange way, like descending a hill I'd never driven before. The fields on either side changed to tall grass where crops should have been, clusters of trees too dense for the farmland I knew. I slowed down, glancing around as if expecting to see a house I recognized or the outline of the old water tower. Nothing looked familiar. The GPS on my phone still showed me on the same road I always took, a straight line from my workplace to home. But the landscape told a different story. The air even smelled different, cooler, older somehow, as if the wind carried something from a place that had been untouched for too long. Normally, when a road starts feeling unfamiliar, you assume you made a wrong turn. But there was no turn to make, no intersections, no side roads. I had been on a perfectly straight path, so how was I somewhere else? My grip on the steering wheel tightened as unease began to grow inside me, slow but steady. I flicked on the high beams, trying to carve more clarity out of the darkness. The extra light didn't help. If anything, it revealed more strangeness. The trees lining the right side weren't the usual oak and maple mix. They were tall, thin pines I had never seen on that route before, their branches hanging almost too low, almost brushing the side of the car as I passed. Then something else happened, something that made the first true spark of fear ignite low in my chest. I saw a house up ahead, sitting alone at the end of a narrow gravel driveway. It wasn't unusual to see farmhouses, but this one was different. All its windows were lit. Not brightly, but with a soft yellow glow that spilled gently into the yard. Every window on every floor was illuminated, like the entire house was awake. As I got closer, I slowed, drawn by a strange mix of curiosity and dread. Something about the house felt wrong, not threatening exactly, but misplaced, like a memory that didn't belong to me. As I passed, my eyes were pulled to one particular window on the second floor. A figure sat in a chair near the glass. At first, I thought it was someone reading or resting, but the posture was too familiar, head tilted slightly forward, shoulders rounded in a way I recognized instantly. My breath caught as I looked closer. The figure looked like me. Same short jacket I was wearing, same shape of hair, same angle of the neck. The realization hit quietly but sharply, as if someone had pressed a cold hand against the back of my spine. I blinked hard, convinced I was seeing shadows wrong or tiredness was distorting my vision. But every time my eyes focused again, the shape remained. The figure didn't move, didn't look up. Just sat there in that chair, staring slightly downward as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I accelerated without thinking, my heart beating fast enough that I felt it in my throat. The house disappeared behind me in seconds, swallowed by the darkness as though it had never been there. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the glow of its windows fading in the distance, but all I saw was an empty road. The fields looked taller now, the grass shifting in a slow, unnatural ripple even though the air inside the car was still. The GPS still insisted I was exactly where I should be, following the same route home, but everything outside contradicted it. A few minutes later, the road curved, another impossibility. My shortcut never curved, not once. It was straight for miles. Yet here I was following a gentle bend that led deeper into trees that didn't belong. My headlights washed over trunks that seemed too close together, their shadows twisting in shapes that made my stomach tighten. I rolled the window up the rest of the way and turned off the radio, feeling the pressure of silence closing in around me. It was the kind of silence that feels intentional, like the world is pausing, waiting for you to notice something. I gripped the wheel harder and pressed forward, praying for any familiar landmark. A barn, a mailbox, a sign, but nothing came. Just more road, more trees, more unsettling sameness that didn't match the landscape I'd known for years. At one point, I slowed the car so much I was barely moving. The forest felt too dense, too watching. I fought the urge to turn around, but something deep inside told me not to. That if I tried to go back, I'd find less of the road than what I'd already lost. And then, without warning, the trees thinned, the road straightened. The sky opened again and I broke out into familiar farmland. The sudden shift was so abrupt I felt physically disoriented, like stepping from a dream into daylight. My dashboard clock, which had seemed frozen for minutes, jumped forward all at once. And there up ahead was the wooden bridge that marked the halfway point of my real route home. Relief washed over me so quickly I exhaled shakily, realizing I had been holding my breath for far too long. But the relief didn't last, because the moment I crossed the bridge and glanced in the mirror, not at the road behind me but at myself, I saw something that made my hands tremble. For a split second, the reflection didn't match my movement. My head tilted just a fraction later than I moved it. My eyes looked slightly downward, not straight ahead, as if mirroring the figure in the chair. I blinked and it snapped back to normal. But the cold in my stomach didn't fade. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I stayed in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. Everything around me looked familiar again, my house, my porch light, the quiet street I knew. But the memory of that other route lingered, heavy and persistent. A version of the road that didn't belong in this world. A version of me that didn't belong in my house. I haven't taken that shortcut since. I stick to the longer main road now, even when I'm tired, even when it adds 20 minutes to my trip. Because sometimes when I'm driving late and the night feels too quiet, I still feel the faint sensation of a curve that shouldn't exist. And in the back of my mind, I know that if I ever take that route again, I might not come back to the version of home I recognize. Or worse, I might come back to find someone else already sitting in my place, staring out from a window, waiting. Night has a way of showing us the places we overlook in daylight, the empty roads, the quiet turns, the stretches of asphalt that never feel threatening until you're the only one traveling them. Listening to these stories, you start to realize that fear doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it slips in slowly, hidden in the corners of familiar places, waiting for the right moment to remind us how thin the boundary is between where we are and where we think we are. These roads weren't supposed to lead anywhere strange, yet each one unraveled into something quieter, older, and far less willing to let its travelers go. If you felt something tonight, some echo of your own late drives or a memory you don't usually revisit, you're not alone. We all have places we avoid after dark, routes that feel different for reasons we can't quite explain. Maybe it's instinct, maybe it's something else. Either way, these stories remind us that even the emptiest roads have their own secrets, and sometimes the darkness out there listens more closely than we do. So take a breath, settle your shoulders, and let the quiet return to something gentler for a moment. If this kind of calm unease stays with you, you're welcome to come back when the night feels too long or sleep feels too far away. You can stay a little longer, subscribe if you want more nights like this, or just return when the silence feels a bit heavier than usual. There will always be new stories waiting here, steady and soft, ready to keep you company when the world falls still. But for now, try to rest. Let your mind settle, even if the roads feel a little different when you picture them. And if you find yourself driving alone sometime soon, keep your eyes steady on the path ahead and notice whether the dark behind you stays where it should. Good night.